That's the theme music, and you know what that means. It's time for another edition of IMNSHOW. In my not so humble opinion, in show form. Whose opinion? My opinion, DP Knudten. And I'm going to be doing what I like to do a lot, which is have an actual recording session for my nonfiction brand podcast. And you get to listen in on the raw feed with my special guest today. And he's a very interesting guest because the dude may have started out in South Africa, but he has lived just about everywhere around the world. And he really has a great, unique perspective because he's been working on branding in all these countries around the world. So welcome to the Nonfiction Brand Podcast, Nicholas. And by the way, he has an umlaut in his last name, so his last name is pronounced Kühne. You don't have to hit it that hard, but, for us Americans, it's not Kühne. It's Kühne. Did I get that right, by the way?
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I just had a call about 2 days ago with somebody I found on LinkedIn called Nick Kühne as well. So I thought, this is hilarious. I have to have him on the show. And one of the first things we did was, okay, how do you pronounce your surname? Because I said, I'm Nicholas Kühne. And he said, that's not how I say it. I say it's Nick Kühne or some other strange pronunciation I'd never heard. But how I try and help people pronounce it's like tuna with a K. So that's the easiest way of pronouncing
Kühne.
it. Kühne. Yeah.
Well,
So
there's a brand in the United States of tuna called Chicken in the Sea, and I don't think that applies to you. So anyway, welcome
no.
to the podcast. I wanted to talk to you. Now, I had the opportunity to be on your podcast, which is called From Start to Wonder Brand. And we had a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And as we talked, I knew I had to have you on here because you've got a perspective that we in America don't always hear. And that is of branders who are not natively from Europe, but have, because obviously South Africa is at the southern tip of the continent of Africa. And your branding experience isn't just European branding either, because you've spent significant time in Southeast Asia. Can you give us a quick itinerary of all the places that you've lived and worked, especially from the point of view of you doing branding?
Yeah. Well, it's been quite interesting because I studied in the UK, came back to South Africa, and one of the companies I'd always admired and sort of as a marketing student wanted to join was Interbrand. And as you know, it's the world's largest brand agency. I didn't start out at Interbrand. I started out selling the precursor to WordPress for a Korean friend of mine while I got into advertising, but that's another story. But I started out in South Africa and then moved to Nigeria, first of all, to set up a trend forecasting company focusing on researching the youth market in Nigeria. That was quite tough. There weren't mobile phones. We had to operate by fax and things like that. And there was no KFC. There were no proper convenience stores. So that was my sort of first move up into Africa. And in South Africa, we say we're going to Africa if we do anything above our borders, because the rest of Africa is just completely different to South Africa. And from there, I managed to wangle a job at Nando's, which is a fast food company selling peri peri flame grilled chicken. And I moved across to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, all across Africa. And we spoke last week a bit about Coca-Cola. I was lucky to travel around to Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania, all of the East African countries with Coca-Cola to visit all their factories. After that, I moved to Nigeria again, and I stayed there for a while. And had opportunities to work in India, Pakistan, and then I moved to Malaysia for 4 years and worked around in that region. The branding, the reason I got into branding was obviously because it's such an exciting field. It matches strategy, which is what I like, and creativity. So it was the perfect role for me, somebody who's a little bit more creative than than strategic. So it was a really nice fit for me. But I started my Wunderbrand agency because while I was heading up Interbrand in Africa, we had clients who were spending $1 million, $2 million for a rebranding exercise, and a lot of US and European companies can afford that. But I saw tons of brilliant local businesses who approached Interbrand and said, "Hey, we'd love to have you guys working on us," but their budgets were just minimal. So I saw this as an opportunity, and my focus at Wunderbrand was to help build emerging market brands and give them the same strategic and creative execution as the large international brand agencies would give them, but at African or emerging market rates. So I've done everything from rebranding banks, telecoms, airlines, even a king or two. And it's been a fantastic journey. And now I'm in Europe, and it's a slightly different environment when it comes to brand, and we can get to that a little bit later.
Did I hear you right? Did you say even a king or two?
Yeah, I've done in Afrikaans, I can't remember the English word now, but a wapen. So it's basically the crest. So we created a new crest for an Oba in Nigeria. So that was quite fun. So
Well,
yeah.
that's a level of personal branding I've never heard of, but I appreciate, because kings and kingdoms definitely have to be branded, not just in terms of having a visual imprimatur, like a flag or something, but also a meaningful difference from anybody else that may have
Well,
a competing kingdom or anything else.
Well, it's the original brand. Can you imagine if you're a knight and you've got two competing armies? You've got one lot with, a cross, another lot with a cross, and you're beating each other over the head. At some stage, they'd have realized, okay, we need to differentiate, who we're killing. So I'm going to have a blue cross. You can have a red cross, and that's probably, where these things started. That's where tartan, the Scots, and their tartan kilts, and I'm sure all sorts of other of these old cultures had very specific branding so that they didn't kill each other kill the wrong person by mistake.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the coat of arms, if you're kind of European chivalry, the coat of arms was the thing that said, listen, I'm from this family or this specific area, the tartans of all the Highland and Lowland clans in Scotland. But even in Africa, you've got hairstyles and fabrics and even ritual scarification and tattooing and things like that. These are forms of branding, and they get so personal that they're actually part of your person, which I think is really interesting, especially from the point of view of what we talk about on this podcast, that of being absolutely authentic to who you actually are. And we talked about this on your podcast a little bit, but I want to ask you a question, because you've been able to serve in so many different countries, in so many different cultures, in so many different ways. Is there a culture, a human culture on the face of the earth that is immune to branding?
Not a single one. And I mean, branding as a topic is quite a big one. What is a brand? So we can have a look at religions as a brand. So you've got Muslims, Christians, Hindus, and the types. And you associate that brand has its own rituals, has its own signals, signs, and it shows belong to a particular tribe. And brands are exactly the same. And if I look at one of the interesting things when it comes to brands around the world, and it's a very good business example, it's the value or the importance of the first mover advantage. So, Christianity in certain countries in South America, Islam in certain African countries and certain places on the subcontinent, Coca-Cola in India, Pakistan, South Africa, America versus Pepsi. So it's the first mover and the first one in there that says I'm the homegrown brand is the one that generally takes hold. So from that perspective, branding is as old as time, and nobody is immune to it.
Yeah, I I'm glad we agree on that violently, because everybody who says, "Oh, I don't believe in brand, I don't buy because of brand," I just laugh at them and say, "Okay, what do you drive? What's on your wrist? What kind of computer do you have? Why do you have those things?" And the answer, yeah, sometimes it's very tied to functionality and feature sets and stuff like that. But if you dig a little deeper, it goes down to brand. Here in the United States, it's not unusual for people who like pickup trucks, utility trucks. They're a Ford family. Grandpa had a Ford F-150. My dad had an F-150. I've got an F-150. And why? Well, because we're Ford people. Why? And the answer is because we're brand loyal, and we don't even know why after a while. And one of the things I wanted to say about your first mover comment is I was talking with someone who is really actively building their personal brand right now, and they're planning to come out with a podcast a couple months from now. And unfortunately, that very day, they had found out that someone came out with a podcast with the exact same title that they already had been working on. But here's the thing I told her. You already got the .com. You got the URL for that. You've already got social tags and handles for that podcast name. You already own those. So in other words, you own the land. They may go up on the air when it comes to their podcast, but you own the land because you've already claimed it. You are the first mover, even if you don't have the first premiere episode, because here's the truth of podcasting. Just because they do one episode doesn't mean they're doing a second. And that certainly doesn't mean they're doing their 200th. So just because they might have the same name, but you own the most important land on social and the internet, I told her, don't worry about that. And she was like, well, should I have it like the name on my podcast with my name? And I go, yes, you have to have your name associated with it. Otherwise, that brand value does not accrue back to you. And people don't understand the importance of that, but you and I know this. As we are looking to bring people onto our podcast, we run across people who have podcasts. And sometimes, truth be told, we do things called podcast swaps, where I'm on your podcast, you're on my podcast. Well, sometimes I get an incoming request to be on my podcast from someone from the ABC podcast. And I'm like, who's ABC? They literally don't have their name associated with the podcast. Now, if it were the ABC podcast with Joe Smith, I would know, oh, it's Joe Smith. And so when you create your personal brand, don't hide behind a shield that is the logo that you came up for your company or anything like that. And, Nicholas, I see you with Wonder Brand. You aren't hiding behind it. You've got it right next to you, but you're not hiding behind it. Your face is out there in front of the brand, and you're actually getting outside of your brand agency by also doing things like teaching, right? You're working at Noroff. Tell us about Noroff.
That's right. Yeah. Well, Noroff's quite interesting. It's a vocational school, and I thought I'd be teaching in my 60s, because that was going to be once I've done my duty in marketing and branding, I would go into teaching. And this opportunity came up to move to Norway and work at Noroff. And Noroff focuses on film, on music production, music design, and digital marketing, among other things. And I thought, okay, well, what am I going to teach these Norwegians that they don't know, coming from Africa and working in emerging markets? And one of the big things that I've noticed or figured out is that because Europe, and I'm sure America is quite similar, because everything works, because if you click a button, you can get DoorDash, your internet works, your water works, your toilet, when you flush it, it works and it does its duty. I've had to work out of broom closets in India and places in Nigeria that would make your hair stand on end. So coming to a first world country like Norway, where everything works, it's been a bit of a challenge because folks are very pigeonholed in, okay, you do this single role and you specialize in that for the next couple of years, and that's what you do. Whereas in my background, we've had to do everything. So you are the designer, the strategist, the client service, the accountant, the legal representative, etc. So we have quite a broad exposure to all aspects of running a business, of running campaigns, working with clients and working with agencies. That is quite new to this industry where you are just focused in one particular area. So what I try and do with my students as well at Neurof is I'm trying to make the killers of Norway. Norwegians are traditionally seen as reserved and very kind. They are very kind and lovely people. But if they are going to compete outside of Norway, and as the government is trying to get more Norwegian businesses to expand out of oil and gas and to move internationally, they're going to have to work with Americans. They're going to have to fight against Nigerians and Indians and Malaysians and Chinese. And it is a completely different kettle of fish. So what I'm trying to do is make them a little bit more, or I think the value that I bring to Neurof is giving them a little bit of that street smarts and slightly more of a killer instinct for a very, very kind and polite society.
Well, that's interesting. Listeners to this podcast have heard me say this before. I'm going to restate that because I'm stumbling here. That's very interesting because listeners on this podcast have heard me tell this story before. One of the things I do when I talk to people is I have them picture in their mind a continuum, a line where you've got on the far left side, you've got pure bureaucrat. I know what I'm doing on a Tuesday afternoon, and I like doing that on a Tuesday afternoon. Then on the polar opposite line, end of that continuum, is the pure entrepreneur, which is, I think I got the first 5 minutes of my Wednesday figured out, and then within 2 minutes of Wednesday starting, I'm working on something completely different because there's this opportunity and I have to take advantage of it. It's so important for you as an individual to understand where you exist on that line, really exist. And what I mean by that is, I don't know if you follow Gary Vaynerchuk here in the United States, Gary V. A very brassy New Jersey guy who drops F-bombs every 5 seconds. He's 100% authentic to who he is, and he is beyond that pure entrepreneur side of the continuum. And he's absolutely true to who he is. And a lot of people want to be like that, but they aren't that. And they struggle, or they think they have to pretend to be like him. And it's like, no, don't be a pale imitation of Gary V. Be a perfect imitation, not even imitation, but be a perfect version of you, because you have value. This relates to what you were saying about Norwegians, because here where I live, Wisconsin, USA, we've got North Germans, Danes, Norwegians, Swedes, Finns, you name it. Northern European is the stock that literally pioneered where I live in the United States. So I understand what you're talking about when you're talking about people who work really hard, but maybe have a tendency to hide their light under a bushel a little bit when it comes to getting out there and in front of or stepping into their own personal brand spotlight. And what I hear you saying is the people in Norway are maybe a little bit more on the bureaucratic side of things than they need to be successful competing in a global market. Am I putting words in your mouth, or does this resonate with you?
No, you're right. There's a term called jenteloven, which is basically similar to what the Japanese have, and I think in England they have it as well, the tall poppy. So the tall poppy always gets cut down, or don't stand out from the rest of the crowd. And it particularly says, do not think you are better than anyone else. Do not think you're smarter than anyone else. Do not think you're, something special. And it's very good in the Norwegian culture, because everything works. People, there's great trust. It's a very homogenous society, and it works. It absolutely works. However, we do live in a globalized society where you have to engage with other folks. And it doesn't mean that the Norwegian way of doing things won't work, doesn't work. It won't work in a majority of cases where you've got completely different mindsets, completely different cultures, completely different ways of doing things. And I've found some other or expats or immigrants like myself in Norway who struggle with integrating into society because in Norway they're very reserved and they are not. It's not dishonest, but they don't tell you how they're feeling until you really know them or they've had a couple of drinks in them. Whereas Italians, your Africans, and so on, you can see how they're feeling. You can see, what's in their mind straight away, and they'll tell you this is bullcrap immediately. That doesn't happen very often in Norway. So yeah, it's a different operating environment, and I've seen that, and it's very clear for me, having worked in India, having worked in South Africa, having worked in these different countries. Just there's no one right culture. You have to just understand how to fit into that culture and how to extract the value that you want from them. And they are so different. Not everyone can hack it.
No, that makes total sense. And the reality is that regardless of what culture you live in, we're all facing changing times that are radically changing, especially when with the advent of AI. Artificial intelligence, I view AI as a tool that can be wielded by a craftsperson or an expert. It's not something I'm afraid of, but I'm aware of its ability to totally disrupt entire sectors of businesses and people's lives. I just spoke with a guy who, without going too much into detail, let's just say there's a major brand of software that supposedly let off a couple of hundred people because they're replacing it with AI. That couple of hundred people is actually 20,000 people around the globe. And so he's completely out of that job, but he recognizes the fact that AI is a tool, and he is now creating his own personal brand and his own company to master that tool and serve that tool craftsmanship up to countless companies, individuals, products, and services. And he is bound and determined to do that because he's not afraid of the tool. He wants to become the master of the tool. And I applaud that sensibility because that is kind of what loosely refers to what you're talking about with, we'll call it the Norwegian personality. Yeah, you're no better than anybody else, but we all recognize that certain craftspeople are better at whatever the craft is than others. So the key is making sure that other people can recognize that you're the best at whatever craft you happen to use as part of your trade and the tools you use to do it. My big thing for people is do not confuse yourself with the tool you use. There's a huge difference. Does that relate to your thinking, the way you think about things?
Yeah, well, you brought up the concept of AI, and when I was in Malaysia, I was running a startup in AI called Matora, and AI has been around for quite a few years. ChatGPT didn't magically create AI; it just happens to be the first really user-friendly AI tool. And yes, it's going to disrupt a whole bunch of industries which need disruption. And there's a lot of work that we've been doing, which is pointless work. And once society gets to a point where things are being codified, so when you look at coding for a website, we've now got WordPress where you can just pull across bits and pieces and you can create a website. AI for me is like a vacuum cleaner. It's like a washing machine, like any other helpful tool that is going to reduce workload. So why do I need to read 20 books to get 5 points to start me off on a business strategy when I can just get what the best standard is in the market? That is extremely useful, and it takes hours or adds hours to my life because I don't have to read a whole bunch of trash. I can, get some good points. But in terms of the craftsman side, like anything, when Instagram came out, a whole lot of photographers thought, "Oh goodness, my career is finished." But what Instagram did is it showed what good quality was. So yes, you can take a photograph with your iPhone and stick it up on Instagram. You're going to get no likes. People will say, they can see it's trash because they've seen 1,000 photos and they can tell which ones are good. The same thing's going to happen in AI. Everyone has access to AI. Everyone has access to Mid-Journey and these amazing new AI tools. But there are going to be technicians and craftsmen who know how to prompt and know how to utilize AI that are going to be, the next technicians, those quality technicians that you're talking about. So I think the tools are great, as you said, but you still need a level of intelligence, a level of forward thinking in order to get the best out of it. And yeah, AI is not going to get rid of all jobs. It's just going to get rid of the useless ones and show up people, or expose people who are not terribly good at what they're doing right now.
Yes, in the words of Scott Galloway, AI is not going to take your job. Someone who uses AI is going to take your job. And I want
Totally.
to talk about all this in next week's episode. As you can see, Nicholas has a lot of great ideas. I love the fact that you're bringing kind of a global view of things to this audience, which is, while it is global, it's still primarily a lot of Americans. And one of the things I like to do to us people in the US of A is remind us that we live on a globe with other countries. So talking to a South African in Norway who's got experience literally all over the map is a real joy for me. So thank you so much for coming on the for coming on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. And I want to remind everybody, of course, that the Nonfiction Brand podcast is brought to you by its dead tree cousin, Nonfiction Brand. Discover, craft, and communicate the completely true, completely you brand you already are, which is, of course, available over at the house of Jeff Bezos, Amazon.com. Just look for Nonfiction Brand and my beautiful face on the cover, and you'll know you've got the right thing. That's it for this week on the Nonfiction Brand podcast. I am, of course, your host, DP Knudten, and he is
Nicholas Kühne.
And we'll be back talking at you next week. Bye-bye. Pause. So live stream people, we've just warped into the future into next week's episode, which will probably air sometime toward the end of beginning or mid October. So anyway, you get a sneak preview of everything right now. Okay, I'm going right into the next episode, Nicholas. So we last left our heroes talking about AI and how it's not AI, the tool, we need to worry about. It's the person who masters AI that we need to worry about. So I have a big theory on how you demonstrate mastery of AI. And it's not by necessarily using AI visibly in front of people, but it's by curating information about AI that maybe not everybody has. And what I mean by that is, if you come across a fantastic tool, like, I don't know if you know this tool, Pod Squeeze is an AI tool that can take your podcast. All you do is put up your MP3 of the podcast. It'll give you a transcript that is pretty darn accurate, but it doesn't just do that. It reads through the transcript and uses AI to come up with, here's a Facebook post, here's a LinkedIn style post, here's 5 points that you might want to include in a PowerPoint, here's this, that, and the other thing, and it does it like in less than 5 seconds. Now, since I am the person who is bringing this technology to your attention, I get a little bit of credit for knowing something about AI that you may not. I have demonstrated my ability to curate a useful tool from AI that utilizes AI. And guess what happens? People go, oh, you know more about this than I do. And all of a sudden, I'm not being replaced by AI. I'm becoming a champion of AI, and I can be a diplomat or an ambassador for AI to you if you have a company that is like, how can we use AI? Well, if I'm the person who can answer some of those questions, I might now have an opportunity to sell you products and services because I have demonstrated a certain level of mastery. The key word there is demonstrate. Now, I'm a big believer in the fact that job one for brands is differentiation. Just like we talked about last week with, hey, I need to differentiate my clan in the battle against the English with the other clans, and I don't want to be killing the wrong people, so everybody who's wearing my tartan, we're part of the same clan. Yay! Differentiation. But the second job of branding is demonstration. You need to demonstrate who you are, what you do, and how you do it when it comes to personal branding. And you are doing that via a podcast. You are doing that via teaching at a vocational school in Norway, in spite of the fact that you're South African, with a global resume that is like incredible. And you are becoming more valuable the more I talk to you, because the more I learn about you really firms up the idea of, wow, this guy truly is a global resource, which is great because I'm an American in the heartland of America. And while I've been abroad a couple of times, I'm not exactly a world traveler the likes of you. So that's why I love having Nicholas on the podcast. What have you been able to bring to your What have you been able to bring to your Norwegian clients and students that made them go, oh, that's interesting?
Well, I think that breadth of experience is quite useful. As you've mentioned, I mean, the States is a world in itself. So you can go left to right, up and down, and you're in different countries, different climates, different products, different brands, etc. And I think what I bring to the table when I speak with my Norwegian colleagues and peers and clients and students is a slightly different viewpoint on the world. Number one, I'm a white South African, so there's a whole bunch of drama and trauma involved in that. Our family moved to Africa, part of it in the 1600s, and then later in the 19th century. And there were reasons for those moves to Africa, and now we moved back into Europe. So it's there's cultural aspect to it, which I bring to my Norwegian clients and class, and the experience side of working for some of the best and some of the worst brands in the world. So the key thing that I try and promote and I try and push is not necessarily my successes, but how to avoid all of the awful crap that I've done over the years in terms of dealing with clients, in terms of dealing with brands, my failures. That's actually more useful, I find, in my later years now with my students and clients than any of my great successes, because those successes are like sand dune. They shift and move. All the beautiful logos I've made 10, 15 years ago, probably gone already. So what I try and do is look at, okay, what are some of the awful experiences, which were awful at the time, that I could use now with that 2020 hindsight, and make sure that a new generation of marketers and brand practitioners don't make the same mistakes. So for me, learning from mistakes is just fabulous, and that's what I try and do. I don't say do this, I say avoid this most of the time.
Well, I got to tell you, I have always believed that you can learn a lot from your successes or when things go well, but you learn more and you learn harder from the failures, from the mistakes, from the lost opportunities or the missed opportunities. And consequently, I love the idea that you take these things, what I would just call experience, because experience can be either a plus or a minus. It doesn't matter. It's that experience is yours and yours alone, and it's valuable. And when you share it with other people, you are then demonstrating your ability to teach them something or share with them something that they're not aware of. And that's a huge part of what makes you a personal brand, as opposed to just another branding teacher at a college or a university or some other school like that. If you bring the failures, especially failures are more interesting. I don't know about, is there a culture in the world, in your experience, that hasn't stopped to watch a train crash?
Everyone loves watching a failure, and some societies celebrate failures a little bit more than others. And uh, yeah, I mean, I could say I'm $1 million failure. I've got $1 million worth of failure receipts that I could bring out on this podcast. So I've got, real examples of dealing with the ups and downs of branding and marketing. So I bring that to the table. But DP, I think we have to go back to the discussion on AI, because I think it's something that people are interested in and extremely concerned about. And I think especially people in the creative and the marketing industries are thinking, "Ooh, this AI is going to steal our lunch." And what I came up with is a concept called creative data science. So, as I mentioned, ChatGPT hasn't just emerged out of the ether. It's got a big background in terms of Google, IBM, and other smart folks over the years. As creative and agency folks, we have the opportunity to take a seat at the table now in this whole AI age. Because data is being cleaned so nicely, because everyone's got access to similar information, similar data, fast decision making, how do you differentiate your offering in the market now, where everyone, the smallest little company and IBM now, have access to theoretically the same type of information? And this is where creativity comes in. And I came up with a concept called creative data science, which is, okay, everyone's got clean data, everyone's got all this technology, which is changing at such a rapid pace. How do you differentiate yourself? And it is through the creative application of AI and data. And that, for me, is the new era that creatives need to go into. Forget about learning how to do Python and R and all of these coding platforms. You need to think about, okay, how can I think differently within an AI context? What data can I insert into this machine that is going to craft something that nobody else has thought of? And again, we've got this huge mass of data. The whole world's knowledge is now sitting in these AI platforms. It's going to require lateral thinkers and creative folks to come up with new and inventive ways to use AI, not coders and not project managers.
Amen. What you're talking about is the kind of intangible parts of creativity that everyone knows is there, but they can't put their finger on it. Things like taste, things like talent, things like intuition. And that's one of the things that's always driven me crazy, is that I never considered myself intuitive until I realized, no, I am, because part of a job of a creative director is to sit there and look at two designs and just say, that one's better. And sometimes when you interrogate why that's better, you can't come up with legitimate reasons, and yet you know. And one of the ways that I really test myself on that is I will look at typography. I am not the most tasteful type chooser in the world. I'm a writer. I come from the writing background. I'm not an art director. That does not mean I don't have good eyes, or eyes that have been, kind of strengthened during my entire career. But there are people who are art directors who are far better at using typography than I am. And yet, if I go to one of those free type font, like defont.com or something like that, where you can see all these different type styles and stuff, I will literally look down the page and go junk, 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 junk. Oh, that one's good. And I don't know why I'm responding to it. I just know that I am. And consequently, that kind of intuitive, I know that's better than the rest of that stuff, has served me well my entire career. And the kind of, let's call it the Norwegian streak in me, although I'm more Danish than Norwegian, it says you're no better than anyone else. Who are you to choose which type style is better? The answer is I'm not better than anybody else, but maybe my taste is a little bit more refined than yours. And so when you're looking at people who, like, as you were talking about using AI, by the way, that whole idea of creative data science, perfect framing, which is it's kind of left brain, right brain all together to create something that's unique and memorable. The first agency I ever worked at, we were coming up with our own branding, and the designer that was hired to actually do it came up with the idea that this agency is like a gyroscope, like a kid's gyroscope. And I saw that thing and I went, oh, boom, strategically guided imagination. Because that's what it was, a gyroscope, which I knew, I don't know why I knew this, but gyroscopes are used in rockets to keep them from going off in, the different directions. So you need to have that strategic guidance, but you also need the imagination. So when I heard you say creative data science, I'm like, that's strategically guided imagination in some ways. So this is just my long-winded ways of saying, Nicholas, we're brothers from a different mother. We think alike. Great minds think alike. That's what I'm saying.
I've just got to give you one of the Norwegian words I've learned, which is from my kids, which is a snurrebus, which is a gyroscope or a spinning top. So that's showing off a bit of my Norwegian. But you talk about you were speaking about heuristics, gut feel. How do you know that this particular font or this particular line works? And humans have a built-in heuristics. So one example of this and how people can filter out bull dust quite easily is, I'm sure you've got quite a few emails coming through to you in your inbox and also on LinkedIn, and you can immediately in the first line tell that this wasn't written for you. You can tell that this is a copy and paste job. This is something that has been generated by a business that is just spitting out content, and that's why writers and that's why creativity is going to be continually important. Now that people have understood this is the kind of language that AI uses, this is the standard repertoire that we can expect in messaging, communication, marketing. Now we have to come up with something that completely upends the way that we send communications to clients. So yes, AI is great. Yes, you can use your podcast program to send out to generate your Facebook, Instagram, and other messages. But people are going to know that has been generated by AI. They will know instinctively without having been told this is made by an AI generated program. And I can spot it now. And I feel ashamed when I use ChatGPT and it churns out a nice sentence, but I have to change it. I have to rework it because it just sounds like plastic. It tastes. I can just feel it. I don't know what it is. All the letters and the words are in the right position, but it's not right.
Yeah, you are so right. And I'm thinking about an email I got from someone who wanted to appear on my podcast, and I could tell they scraped my LinkedIn profile and maybe scraped like the first or the last 5 episodes of my podcast in terms of data. And they said, I was recently listening to your insert podcast name here. I enjoyed your conversation with podcast guest. I especially liked your comment about blankety blankety blank. And it's like, I could smell the AI on it. And when I talked about using Pod Squeeze, what I didn't say is, oh, by the way, every single one of those outputs from the AI I would use, but I would definitely go in and change 30% of, at least 30% of. The fact that it did 70% of the post and it allowed me to just frost the cake a little bit differently to add my own spin to it, that saved me a huge amount of time. Absolutely. That did not divorce me from the reality of the fact that I needed to make it my own. And I agree with you 100% because we have such well-developed BS detectors. And as you kind of alluded when you talked about Instagram did not kill the professional photographer. It made everyone sensitive to what a professional photographer can bring to an image that they can't. And, pro level photographers, while many of them are hurting, the very best of the best are still in demand for, high fashion and luxury branding and magazine covers or imagery on websites, etc. The fact is, if you can become the named individual, and I think of fashion brands, because as you were talking about, everyone now has access to all this clean data. Well, that's like saying everybody has access to the same looms and weavers of fabrics as the top fashion houses in Paris or Milan or New York. Yeah, they do. And yet only a handful of people have gotten to the level where their brands are so big that people literally clamor for what they're doing. And again,
Well,
yeah, go ahead. I didn't mean to.
well, it goes into that old saying of, the cream floats to the top, or in this case, non-fiction brands float to the top, because as you said, that people have been exposed to so many inputs now, and we can spot trash from what's good. So I think all of these websites that allow you to make your own things just show us how terrible we really are doing something, and why you need to get a professional to do it. So I just see positives in all of these. And I'm also I can't remember if meritocracy is everyone must be the same, or if meritocracy means that the best float to the top. But I'm for the latter. I think that not everyone in the world is meant to succeed. Not meant to succeed, but not everyone's going to succeed. And it's tough, because we obviously want everyone to do well and everyone to have a great time. But you need outliers. You need those who think differently. I think we should celebrate greatness in a lot of spaces, as opposed to just mediocrity, which is what's happening now. So what's going to happen is AI is going to create a huge layer of mediocrity. It is going to allow everyone to be at the same level. I think this AI is the great leveler for humanity. And this is going to now allow people to, have the minimum wage and do activities that they need to. But you're going to find those individuals who do that creative data science I was talking about, who bring in that left and right brain and just create something new and exciting out of AI. So that's what I'm excited for. It's the new internet era, but with AI. And these large companies are too slow basically to turn. So you're going to see these little flashes of brilliance, and some folks who've been let go from these big software companies see, I've got a great idea that my department head didn't want me to do because it's going to take too long. I'm going to do it myself. And I don't need a team, because I've got ChatGPT and I can create something that is going to change the world. So there are so many exciting things on the horizon with AI that we haven't seen yet, because people haven't read the manual yet. People haven't taken the time to see, how do you actually talk to ChatGPT? How do you talk to Midjourney and get and extract value out of it? So reading the manual, for any of you listening, if you want to be better than 99% of people in the world, just read the manual, read the basics on how to use AI, and you'll be streets ahead of everyone else.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And the first step, even before reading the manual, is accepting the fact that AI is not going away. It is, if you want my take on it, and this is because I'm old enough to remember the night this happened, the U.S. Congress voted to allow commercial activity to occur on what was then ARPANET and the internet, the earliest days of the internet. The U.S. Congress said, yes, you can do commercial things, you can sell things. Well, it took a decade for people to really get what that means. And then kaboom, everything changed. Jeff Bezos is as rich as he is because he figured out a way. And by the way, remember, he started out as a bookstore. Why did he pick books? Because he literally said, well, what's easy to warehouse? What has a ton of different SKUs, shelf keeping units? What has a ton of SKUs, warehouses really well, doesn't require refrigeration, doesn't require heat, and we can send out and we can deliver them in packaging where it won't get destroyed. What type of stuff can't be destroyed? Books. And isn't that funny that the entire brave new world of merchandising online was created by one of the oldest technologies known to man, the movable type, the Gutenberg press, and the book, which supposedly had been replaced by radio and TV and movies and everything else. Guess what? Nothing goes away. It just changes. And the question is, are you going to accept those changes? Well, if you're listening to Nicholas Kühne, I think, and he's a great guy to listen to, by the way, you need to check out his podcast, which is called, say it with me, From Startup to Wunderbrand, or Wunderbrand.
Wunderbrand.
How do you say it, Nicholas?
Wunderbrand. You said it beautifully.
Wonderful. And when does those podcast episodes come out?
So we basically have Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I might tone down the regularity, but basically 3 times a week you should get a new podcast with interesting folks like yourself. And it's been such a fascinating process, just because I haven't dealt with that many Americans, and I've from coast to coast now. I've been speaking to folks with differing accents, and it's been fun.
Well, and the thing is, and why I'm such a big fan of podcasts, if you can do it, is that you have the opportunity to reach out to a dude in Oslo, Norway, and get him on your podcast and learn new stuff. And because I'm the one who's inviting you onto my podcast, I get a little credit. Or I like to put it this way, when I shine the spotlight on someone else, it can't help but reflect back positively on me. That's what I'm saying. Anyway, Nicholas, how can people get a hold of, or where do you like to hang out online? If people wanted to contact you, where could they do that?
LinkedIn is probably the best spot. I'm quite active there, and you can get me at LinkedIn and then Nick Kühne, or just on Wunderbrand's website. So you can also email at me at nicholas@wunderbrand.com if you are desperate to chat with me. And as you said, I'm always interested in chatting to interesting folks with different opinions. And I think, DP, you're definitely one of those. You're not scared of stoking the flames and stirring the pot.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me tell you, I've lost multiple jobs for stirring the pot a little too much. You know what I'm saying? The funny thing is, people say they want you to stir the pot, and then when you do, it's like, we didn't want it stirred that much. Anyway, but I got to be true to me. Nicholas has got to be true to him, and we have to be true to the nonfiction brands that we are truly creating for ourselves. We have to be true to the nonfiction brands we are truly creating for ourselves. And let me tell you, if listeners, you need to do that for yourself, because if you are the craftsperson who is renowned for using powerful tools like artificial intelligence, guess what? You have a future that's unlimited. It is only limited by your vision of what you can do, where you can do it, and who you can serve. So get off your butt and into the game and build your nonfiction brand. Once again, this podcast is brought to you by Nonfiction Brand. Discover, craft, and communicate the completely true, completely you brand you already are. It's the book version of this podcast, which is available at Amazon.com. Just search for Nonfiction Brand and my last name, Knudten, K-N-U. D as in David, T as in Tom, E as in Edward, N as in nothing. That's it for this week on the Nonfiction Brand Podcast. I am, of course, your host, DP Knudten, and he is
Nicholas Kühne.
And I'll be talking at you again next week. Bye-bye. Okay, so pause. Listeners or viewers of the live stream, goodbye. We're ending this episode. Nick, stay on the line a little bit because I want to say goodbye. But thanks for watching, and we'll be, whenever you hear that theme music, oh yeah, you know what that means. It's time for IMNSHOW with this guy. Anyway, thanks a lot. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.